Hello, everyone. So this event that you're here for was organized in conjunction with an exhibition that's currently across the street. It is dedicated to Soviet nonconformist artists Komar and Malamud. It is an extraordinary show, and I hope all of you will get the chance to go. It was curated by Dr. Julia Tolokovsky. So tonight we are thrilled to present an exhibition by someone that Komar and Malamud greatly and deeply admire. In a few moments, we will hear from performance artist and activist Nadya Tolokonnikova, creator of Pussy Riot, a Russian feminist art collective founded in 2011, known for their unauthorized, provocative guerrilla actions in public spaces. Pussy Riot is an activist group that supports gender fluidity, inclusivity, matriarchy, love, laughter, decentralization, anarchy, and anti-authoritarianism. Since their founding, Pussy Riot members have been constantly attacked by the police, nationalists, pious Christians, Putin-loving thugs, and government officials. Indeed, in 2015, Nadya was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment following an anti-Putin performance at a church in Moscow. While there, she went through a hunger strike, protesting savage prison conditions, and as a result was sent away to a Siberian penal colony, where she remained until 2013. Nadya is the co-founder of an independent news service and media outlet that's called Media Zona, which is a Pussy Riot publication that's focused on Russia's penal and legal systems. She has been highly active lately in crypto fundraising projects, including NFT drops that help fund a shelter for victims of domestic violence in Russia, as well as fundraisers for the people of Ukraine, Russian political prisoners, and for reproductive rights. And she's also a visual artist, represented by Jeffrey Deitch Gallery, and has recently collaborated on projects with feminist artists like Jenny Holzer, Judy Chicago, Michelle Pred. Her recent exhibition at Deitch Gallery, which I hope we'll hear about today, was in January, and it was titled Putin's Ashes. And she received tons and tons of attention, but it resulted in a criminal case leveled against her, again, by Vladimir Putin. Tonight, Nadya will present a talk about her artistic practice titled Under the Shadow of Evil, Pussy Riot, and Standing Up to Vladimir Putin and His Legacy of Ashes. The lecture will be followed by a conversation with Masha Gessen, a staff writer at The New Yorker and the author of 11 books of nonfiction, including The Future is History, How Totalitarianism Reclaimed Russia, which won the National Book Award in 2017, and importantly, the book Words Will Break Cement, The Passion of Pussy Riot, Gessen teaches at Bard College. Now, before we begin, I'd like to ask everybody to please mute your cell phones if you haven't done already, just a gentle reminder. And we will begin the evening with, I think, 2 videos, and then Nadya will join us on the stage. So please join me in welcoming her in advance of her coming to the stage. Thanks.
Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has given RT an exclusive interview. He was pushed for his views on the case of the Russian punk band Pussy Riot.
А вы могли бы перевести название группы на русский язык? Вы же уже не 1 год живете в России.
Pussy Riot, the punk band. I don't know what you call them in Russian, so maybe you could tell me.
Но можете перевести само слово на русский язык или нет? Или вам неудобно это сделать по этическим соображениям?
We thought it was referring to a cat, but maybe I'm missing a point.
Граждане эти навязали общественному мнению вот свое название и заставили всех вас произносить его вслух. У нас в стране есть очень тяжелые воспоминания начального периода советского времени. В целом государство обязано защищать чувства верующих. Я считал и считаю, что наказание оно должно быть адекватно содеянному.
Riot. Бунт, погром, восстание.
То, чем занимается группа Pussy Riot, это позиционное искусство.
Государство сильнее, сильнее времени! Чем больше арестов, тем больше счастья!
Мне хотелось бы процитировать песню группы Pussy Riot. Откройте все двери, снимите погоны, почувствуйте с нами запах свободы.
Our next guest is Nadya Tolokonnikova, founding member of the Russian protest art collective Pussy Riot. Her new art installation at the Jeffrey Deitch Gallery in Los Angeles last month is called Putin's Ashes. Her new crime, according to Russian authorities, was mounting the exhibit.
My job for quite a while, for the last 15 years of my activism, is to hurt Vladimir Putin as much as I humanly can. And my instrument of war is my art. We know that he's incredibly superstitious, so he might actually be afraid. Putin has pissed himself. My personal answer is to just increase my efforts, bring Putin's ashes to other institutional spaces. I really want to bring Putin's ashes to Berlin, to London, to bring it closer to Putin's home. Unfortunately, Putin doesn't understand just a normal conversation. He understands only strength, and this is what we have to show him. Привет. Right? Богородице Дева, Путина прогони, Путина прогони, Путина прогони. Okay, so last time I went to the church and performed this song. I was imprisoned in the result for 2 years. Was sent to labor camps where I had to perform practically slave labor. And one of the charges that I had is that I showed too much of my skin. So today I decided to play it safe and wear this headscarf. Yeah, well, let's start. It was the winter of 2004, and I was studying in school, and we were told that today we're not going to have physics lessons. It's going to be replaced with something else, which is more important. It's a sexual education lesson. And so instead of our teacher, who usually was our physics teacher, we had a priest coming in to our class. And he told us that our vagina has memory, and it's going to remember everyone who ever was in your vagina, and especially the first person with who you lost your virginity. And they called this effect telegony. And, well, this is my first ever meaningful interaction with the priest. I was growing up in Norilsk, which is in Siberia. It's on the top of Siberia. Siberia has the shape of a huge cock. If you Google Siberian dick, you will see that it indeed has a shape of a cock, even with a cum. And so I was growing up in the very top of that penis. And so whenever anyone tries to impress me with the size of their penis, it's completely impossible, because to get from the top of the penis to the bottom in the middle of the balls, you need to spend 4 hours on the plane. I was growing up in Norilsk, and it's a city that was built on the bones of prisoners. It was started by Stalin during Gulag times, and our buildings are literally built on top of prisoners' bones. I was born in 1989, in the beginning of a new era on the 7th of November, which is a day of Russian Revolution of 1917. So my whole life I was thinking that I was brought to this world to create a revolution. And so my first ever beef with Vladimir Putin happened when he came to power and he immediately canceled my birthday. I didn't have to go to school on the 7th of November, and then after Putin came, I was forced to go to school because that man is really scared of any change. He's a KGB, now FSB officer, and there's no such a thing as people who used to work in the FSB. They always remain the FSB people deep in their soul if they have one, which I highly doubt about Putin. When I was growing up, I was imagining that I live on Pluto, and I'm about to discover the galaxy because it was so cold and so contaminated. Our rivers were red and our snow was black, and there was nothing to see in the city besides smog. And it made me an activist and an environmental activist really from my early age. My mom hated my dad, and she wanted to completely get rid of him in our family. They were separated when I was 5. And my dad told me that if he could make a list of 20 people to kill, and he would not face any consequences, any legal consequences for that, my mom would be on top of that list. So that was my childhood. Growing up, I couldn't go outside for walks because it was too cold. If you Google Norilsk, it's one of the most depressing cities on the planet. This is officially what Google says, it's not me. And it forced me to read a lot. Basically, any young person in Norilsk is presented with just 2 options. One is run into books, nowadays possibly internet, and another one is to run into alcohol and drugs. So people really start drinking and doing drugs really from incredibly early age, sometimes as early as 11, 12. I was reading most of my life, and I didn't know why my parents, my mom didn't love that at all, so I had to hide books from her. Sometimes she would come into my room and she would scream at me because she would find me reading. It was a little bit like an Bradbury novel, Fahrenheit 451 Fahrenheit. I would read Schopenhauer, Sartre, because I was trying to dream, and I think that place where I was growing up was teaching me how to dream because I had nothing else to see around me. I was born with horns. When I saw my first photo when I was born, I was crying for 3 days because I was thinking I'm just a mutant or something. But my mom told me it's just a normal trauma, and horns are going to go away. But according to the Russian Orthodox Church and our court, they never went away. They call me demon. My father writes about me. When she was 4, Nadya absolutely consciously, strictly, and businesslike said to me, "Papa, never force me anything." I don't remember what the occasion was, but I immediately understood it as Declaration of Independence. And I have never forced her anything. I have only motivated her. My point of departure was her inner willingness to do something. I cultivated her from within, like a crocus blossom. Russia in the 90s was so much more beautiful and exciting than any other country in the 90s because we were learning how to live another life, and we had to invent everything. Even advertisements, we had to reinvent them. So I claim that Russian advertisements from the 90s are work of art in a way, and people were forced to be artists and reinvent their lives, including my family and my mom, who officially said that she hates art, though, and she said that one stupid people write books, stupid people read books. When first big supermarkets opened in Moscow in the 90s, me and my dad would go to those supermarkets as if it were museums. We didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't buy a lot of things, maybe bread or cookies and milk. But I didn't want to own anything. So for me, as a child who was born on the like when the Soviet Union fell apart, the culture of consumption wasn't given. So I didn't really know how to want to own things. I looked at the products at the store and I thought that I already have them because I have them in my mind. I understood them. I realized them. I own the idealistic platonic ideal of those products, so I don't actually have to own them, which later brought me to shoplifting because I didn't want to be involved in the culture of consumption. So for 6 years of my life, during all of my active performance art guerrilla years, was living solely by shoplifting. I've started to call myself feminist when I was 8 years old. I've seen huge inequality before, but I didn't know how to describe it. And then I found a book at my mom's bookshelf. I don't think she read it because she didn't think that she's a feminist. But I thought it's something that I need to not even use, but cherish as this wonderful lens that helps women, young girls, to understand what does it mean to be what does it mean to exist in a world that is dominated and owned by men. And ever since I learned about feminism, my life became arguably, well, I ended up in jail, but deep inside me, I felt better because I understood that this problem that I see is not about me. It is a structural, it is a systemic problem, and it's not just me who is failing, but it's the society who is failing young girls, women, because of sexism and ageism that they continuously experience. My number one plan in life was to be a journalist, but when I came to a local newspaper with a piece about terrible pollution in my city, they told me, we cannot publish it because you understand why. And this, ну вы же понимаете. Это страшная фраза, которая преследовала меня потом всю жизнь. And it basically taught me about censorship and self-censorship, because every authoritarian society is based on people self-censoring themselves. For the most part, the dictator, the authoritarian leader, doesn't have to kill or put in jail everyone. It's enough to show a couple of bad examples, what can happen with you if you misbehave, and then other people follow. But if a critical mass of people say that we see that the emperor is naked, then it changes, inevitably changes. There's a beautiful essay by Václav Havel. It's called The Power of the Powerless. And he talks exactly about this mechanism that holds together any authoritarian society, and he was writing particularly about Soviet authoritarian societies. I found this essay when I already was in my labor camp in Mordovia, and I was at the lowest point of my life. I was thinking I'm going to give up. It didn't mean for me that I would start praising Vladimir Putin, but I just wanted to stop everything, stop my activity, and just try to get out of it as soon as I can and go and raise my child, never think about politics ever again. And then I saw this essay and it really changed my life, and it brought a lot of, it brought a lot of consequences to my prison administration, but I'll talk about it later. Because I became a giant pain in the ass, inspired by Václav Havel. So journalism didn't work for me because I didn't like this concept of censorship. Basically, what they did, it wasn't Putin, it wasn't any oligarch who called them and said, you cannot publish this. It was this editor-in-chief of this small Zapolerная Pravda newspaper who self-censored and censored me. So I said, fuck it, and I've decided to study philosophy instead. I wanted to understand what it is in people's heads, who rule, who are in power in my country, who imprison and kill people like me. Because I realized at that point when I was 16 that I'm going to be the one who's going to be opposing the existing power structure. There is no such a thing as art that exists outside of politics. All art is political. If you choose to stay away from politics in your art, it's one of the biggest political positions that you can take, and it just means that you are simply a supporter of everything that is happening right now. Is a supporter of the injustice, crimes that are that are happening in front of your eyes, and you consciously decide not to do anything about it. So this was something that I realized when I was 16 or 17, and I was trying to do some actions at the time. They were not really good, but I did my best, and one of my first actions was this Boga piece. I didn't want to settle on Boginya. I basically didn't love the fact that Bog, God, is inherently male, and I didn't like the sound of Boginya because it's like, to me it sounded almost like little female god, so I called, instead of Bog, I called her Boga, which is more like God, if it translates in English anyhow. And I was trying to build my relationship with this female god. Moscow in the 2000s was a really, really incredibly glamorous place. I entered Moscow State University to study philosophy, and I've never seen so much luxurious shit as I've seen at the parking lot of the Moscow State University. Gucci, Prada, Birkin, Louboutin, I didn't know any of that. And I didn't expect to see that because I was thinking we're going to be talking about Platonic ideals. But it turned out that most of the people who came to Moscow State University just wanted to study there to be installed comfortably in this luxurious way of living that Moscow had to present in 2000s. I wasn't really I wasn't agreeing with that, so that led me to becoming pain in the ass first at my university, and then it led me to start the first performance group that I co-founded in 2007. In Moscow State University, I was trying to go for the most difficult thing that I could find, which was writing about queer studies. As you can imagine, under homophobic Putin was really not a popular topic, and There was an additional problem. There were not a lot of books translated to Russian on this topic. And one of the beacons that I found for myself was Kharkiv Center for Gender Studies, led by an amazing sociologist, Irina Zherebkina. And it just turns out, so Putin destroys really everything that I ever loved. If you've ever seen pictures of how Kharkiv looks today in the midst of the war, you will understand what I mean. After a few months of me trying to convince the faculty that I want to write about queer studies, and it's a completely valid topic, they let me to do so. And when the time came and I had to present my coursework, an older professor started to laugh at me because I talked with him about queer identities. And he said, "Are you married?" And I said, "Yes." And he went, "Why don't you rather write about sex poses that you prefer with your husband than writing about queer identities?" And he said it was deeply inappropriate, and they lowered my mark. Then I started a big scandal about it. They gave me the best mark. In 2007, I co-founded the first collective, the performance art collective that I was a part of. It's called Voina, and Voina means war. And we went with war to the existing power structures and institutions that we saw around us. We didn't like complacency and conformism of the art scene, because I was thinking art is supposed to be explosive and subversive. It's supposed to serve underrepresented communities. It's supposed to ask uncomfortable questions and search for truth. We didn't see a lot of it because, well, there is such a thing as commercial art, and for the most part, they just keep making the same shit that sells, and so we didn't find what we wanted to see, and we decided to create it. And one of my favorite actions of Voina group is storming of the White House. We found a projector, a laser projector, that is capable of producing massive images. And we broke the lock on one of the roofs of the Hotel Ukraine. And right across the river from the Hotel Ukraine in Moscow, you see a giant canvas. And this giant canvas is the White House of Russia. And it's much bigger than the American one. We learned when the lights at the White House go down, because throughout the night they usually illuminate this house, but then in the very beginning of the sunrise they turn them off. So that was the time when we came there with the projector, and we couldn't obviously tell this commercial projection firm what we are about to do. So we told them a lie, and it was something like, we want to celebrate the birthday of our friend who works in a big corporation. We showed another building near the White House, and we just said, oh, it's just a whatever. He works in oil industry and he likes pirates. And so the projection was skull and bones, It was the 7th of November 2008. It was my birthday, day of revolution, and also the birthday of Nestor Makhno, who is a Russian anarchist from the past. To celebrate his and mine birthday and the day of Russian Revolution, we decided to project Skull and Bones. So, in order to move the picture from that another building, one of us wore Russian police uniform that we had from our previous action. And at the moment of the action, that guy in Russian police uniform, Воротников, he runs into the room and fake arrests us. And obviously everyone's scared of cops, especially in Russia. And so what happened, we were able to move the laser projection right to the White House. And it was a sign for the storm. The way we stormed the White House, we climbed into the fence, which was 6 meters tall. They're quite scared of revolution, as I said before, so they surround themselves with this fence. And it was also an homage to Eisenstein, the famous shot from Eisenstein when they stormed the Winter Palace. And our job was to run through the territory of the White House and escape from another side, climb on top of the fence again. The goal of this action was really simple, and it has something to do with what I said earlier about submission and about self-censorship. Most of the people in 2008 thought that not a lot of things can be done. They just thought that our government knows how to protect themselves, and so it doesn't matter what we do, we cannot go against this big mountain, this big man that sits in this big house, and there is nothing can be done. So we decided to break this illusion, and I think that's basically what Pussy Riot and Voina, mine art, does. We try to break the illusion of omnipotence that Putin tries to create for himself. That's why I created Putin's ashes, to visualize the end of his evil empire. We've done it. We've done the storm of the White House. We ran away to the streets. Nobody caught us. Actually, ФСО, Федеральная служба охраны, cops who guard the White House, they're actually really clumsy and not as effective as everyone thinks. And this is the same thing that Navalny, probably all of you saw this amazing documentary on Navalny. You should see it if you didn't. It's available on HBO. He talks with his poisoners. He survived the attempt of assassination, and then he calls his poisoners from the FSB, and he says that I'm calling from Bastrykin, who is the head of the FSB. Why did you fail? Why didn't they kill this guy? And they give him the whole story. They gullible, not that smart, not that effective. And this is another thing that Ukraine helps us to understand, that this big bear of Russian army, in fact, is stupid and clumsy and bloodthirsty, they're thirsty not just for blood of Ukrainian people, but also for Russians as well. The way they treat Russians, they treat them basically as cannon meat. And it's incredibly sad, but that's what Ukraine helps us to realize, that this big monster, this big aura of big man riding on a bear that Putin was trying to cultivate for dozens of years is actually fake, and he's much more weak and stupid And funny at times. Sometimes he tries to be funny, but it doesn't really work. Well, we started to perform publicly. We started to perform concerts, like so-called music, publicly in 2010 when we... Pussy Riot was still 1 year away, but it was the action of Voina group. We came to the court. There was a court case for запретное искусство, forbidden art. Andrei Yerofeev and Yuri Samadurov, two curators of this exhibit in Sakharov Art Center, were charged with extremism and religious hatred. They were facing a few years in jail for organizing an art exhibition. The reason why they were charged, they collected all the works that were rejected throughout the year in other institutions, museums, galleries, for whatever reason, mostly because they were too political or over the top or whatever. Institutions often try to play it safe. So these two guys, Andrei Yerofeev and Yuri Samadurov, didn't, and they got in trouble. And we wanted to help them, and the way we helped them was to appear in the courtroom with our song that went, the lyrics went like, "All cops are bastards, you should remember about it." And we performed right in the middle of the judge's speech. In 2011, we created Pussy Riot. And it was me and my friend Kat. And in our previous art collective, it was a mixed collective, men, women, and we were really bummed because the men would always get all the titles: leaders, producers, ideologists, the main artist. I never even appeared in the photos. They, our internal group members would refuse me to be together with them in their interviews because they didn't want to give me any visibility. One of our comrades, ex-comrades, Oleg Vorotnikov, co-creator of Voina, said that I never seen a good woman artist. And we still worked together for a couple of years because we thought we have a common enemy, so whatever works, they're effective, they're good. But then we just got enough of it. And it was me and Kat, who was another member of Voina group. We've decided to create our own collective, and we put on masks partly because we didn't want to be connected with the old one. And another reason of ours was that we wanted to create a sense of multitude of performance art groups who oppose Vladimir Putin in Russia. In fact, at the time, there were not really a lot. It was mostly us. But our dream was to start a movement. It wasn't a movement in the beginning. It was just me and Kat and her cat, who would always piss on our balaclavas. So it was nothing but glamorous in the beginning. And the moment when we realized that we absolutely have to create Pussy Riot was when we were asked to make a lecture. And we started to prepare for this lecture just the night before, as it happens. And we promised to deliver a lecture on the topic of punk feminism in Russia. And then while doing research, we realized that we couldn't find any punk feminism in Russia. And we ended up creating Pussy Riot that night when we were preparing for the lecture, because we had to talk about something. We didn't know how to write lyrics. I hate poetry, just hate it. I don't understand why rhymes exist. And it was a torturous activity. Then we didn't know how to use Ableton or any other audio equipment. So we had to just sample a piece from an old oi punk band and just play it over and over again, but we didn't really know how to connect the sample, so it goes like tun 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 tun. And then we went to the bathroom to record the song. Katya lived with her dad, who hates feminism. He ended up being a witness against me during our court case because he was convinced that I was the one who seduced his daughter into feminism. He screamed at us, he kicked us out of the house, and so we ended up recording the song outside under the rain. Next day we presented Pussy Riot. We didn't say it's us. We didn't want to be, we wanted to create superheroes, entity that is not connected to any physical humans. So as long as it exists only on the level of ideas, it cannot be heard. If there is even one person who can think about this idea, it still can be alive, even if something happens with us. And we knew that something can happen with us because we lived in a pretty dangerous environment. At that time, I already lost 2 friends of mine to the fight. They were murdered by neo-Nazis. Baburova, Anastasia Baburova and Stanislav Markelov, they were fighting on the side of the good against evil, and they became victims. People were murdered, beaten, arrested around us, and you never think that it's something that will happen with you, actually. At least I never thought of it, never, as an actual practical possibility. But for the movement, we had to be a little bit more realistic. So we put this politics in place that anyone can be Pussy Riot. So even if you're deceased, then Pussy Riot can exist after us. We presented Pussy Riot, and then after that we didn't really want to pay that much attention to this group that we just created. We didn't have any name, nobody cared. But the idea of something beautiful, colorful, all-female, non-binary, queer, protesting against this gray, old-fashioned, clumsy, stupid machine, bureaucratic machine that was created by Putin, it kept haunting us. And then Putin helped us to gain strength. Thanks to him, he said he's going to be re-elected. So we knew that something tragic is going to happen from it. It was his third term, and it wasn't just us who realized that something bad is going to happen. A lot of people in my country felt that this is the beginning of the end for Russia. This is Putin turning his country into ashes. There was a big movement. Hundreds of thousands of people hit the streets in Moscow in the end of 2011, the beginning of 2012, and it was the time when Pussy Riot created their most known and arguably best actions. I realized that I have to take a break from my studies at university because I have one really bad habit. I can focus just on one thing at the time, and I want to give it 100% of me. So I was about to finish the university, and I really wanted to be a doctor of philosophy at some point, because with the nature of my work, it was quite provocative and insane, but I wanted people to also treat me a little bit more seriously because I would be a doctor. So it didn't happen. I had to step back from this last 6 months of my study because I wanted to focus 100% on creating Pussy Riot. And our first ever tour was called Free the Cobblestone, and I didn't tell it to a lot of people, but I recently was talking to Masha Gessen, who is a member of Navalny's team, a brilliant politician, and I told her that, do you know that Pussy Riot was motivated partly because of Navalny? He was growing at the time as like he was becoming what he is today, the leader of Russian opposition. He emerged from being just a blogger and just an activist, one of many, into one of the most effective politicians in Russia. Today, he is arguably number 2 politician if you place Putin at number 1. I don't know if you do. And Navalny wrote in his blog, there is a contest. If you're going to write a song or make a piece of art about the upcoming parliamentary elections, I'm going to give you a little bit of money and put the piece out in my live journal, which was a big, popular live journal, and I wanted it. So me and Kat were both inspired by it, and we also thought that we were a little bit, we were confident. We were confident that nobody can do art better than us in this political field. So we created our first public transport tour in response to Navalny's call. And we never actually submitted the piece to Navalny because in the process, we realized that it outgrew the contest and we didn't want to, it was too good to be submitted. We performed mostly in subway, performed on the rooftops of trolley buses, and our idea was that we need to bring the art to people, because what is the point of performing in front of people who already know what you think about the power? You want to bring it to people who never get a chance to even think about it. If you place your art into a gallery, most likely those who already somehow familiar with their practice are going to come and see it. But if you do it in public space, then yeah, you might shock some people, and some people might enjoy it and get inspired. Years later, we realized that we actually did inspire some people. How much time do I have? I have 5 minutes? Oh shit, I'm just starting with Pussy Riot. Okay, then our next tour was called Kropotkin Vodka, and you probably know Molotov cocktail, but I don't like Molotov as much. I like Kropotkin. He's an anarchist, and so we decided to create something alternative to Molotov cocktail, and we called it Kropotkin Vodka. And we came to all of the luxurious places in Moscow, like fashion shows, unannounced boutiques, and performed the song to those people who were silent because they were silenced with money and status that they felt like they couldn't afford to lose. Unfortunately, they were proving wrong. By staying silent, they actually are losing it today. a lot of people who had to leave Russia. Those people who stay in Russia, they're also losing their influence, money, and I'm not happy about it at all. It's just, we were trying to warn people, and not a lot of people listened to us. In a month, we did an action, Death to Prison, Freedom to Protest. It was a big rally, after which Alexei Navalny, Ilya Yashin and Navalny are both in Russian jail today under ridiculous charges. They're locked up for years and years. At that time, they were arrested for 2 weeks, and we thought it's incredibly long and stupid. They shouldn't be there. So we came to their jail and performed. It was called Death to Prison, Freedom to Protest. Peter Verzilov was also arrested. He's a father of my kid and my ex-husband, who these days spends most of his time in Ukraine on the front line in Bakhmut these days. 2 people in jail, 1 person in Bakhmut. It's incredible how my fate is intertwined with the modern history of Russia. I wish it was different. Then in 2012, we did Putin Has Pissed Himself. And a lot of people think that actually because of this action, happened what happened. Arrests happened not just because of the church action, but partly because of Putin Has Pissed Himself. Because we basically did what that fairy tale character did. We went to the middle of the Red Square and screamed from the top of our lungs that Putin has pissed himself. We screamed that the emperor is naked and that he's going to be taken down soon. And then Virgin Mary get rid of Putin. Probably heard of it. This is our punk prayer that brought us to 2 years in jail. But with getting locked up, our job didn't stop. It's actually just started. We went on numerous hunger strikes, and me and my comrade Masha went into a few hunger strikes to protest the prison conditions. At some point, I wrote a big prison letter that we managed to sneak out of jail, where I wrote about this terrible living and working conditions in which everyone was forced to live for dozens of years in Russian jail. Besides that, I was sharing my penal colony with Evgenia Khasis, who is a neo-Nazi responsible for murdering 2 friends of mine who I mentioned earlier. And I think it was not a coincidence that we were put in the same penal colony. Probably they were expecting that we are going to murder each other. We were not friendly, but we didn't murder each other. And this prison letter about conditions in my penal colony had an incredible effect. And it taught me something, that even if you're at the lowest position possible, you still can fight back. And somehow, weirdly, by fighting back, you start to feel better. Because, as I mentioned before, I was at my lowest position. I wanted to give up and just crawl under my bed in prison and die, because it was unbearable. People had to work for 16 hours a day without days off. I was sent to a special unit that was known for a unit of the psychological torture type unit, where we just got screamed at 24/7. We performed really difficult physical jobs, and it was done on purpose, just to break our spirits. We were forced to sew police and military uniforms. these days, people who protest against the war in Ukraine are being sent to Russian jail and forced to sew military uniforms. That's how torturous our state is. A few years later, this guy who was in charge of creating this slave labor system in my penal colony was charged himself, and he ended up in court. He was charged with creating slave labor system, and it happened because of my letter. And that episode taught me that resistance makes you feel better and more confident. And more than that, after I wrote my letter, my prison conditions changed 180. I was transported to Siberia, which sounds bad, but in fact, 2 last months of my prison term after my hunger strike, I lived luxuriously. I didn't get out of bed. I was eating grapes and watermelon and reading Victor Hugo. And when I said that I'm bored, the prison boss brought me to a rock group. So I was part of the rock group. And then we toured the prison facilities. So they even entertained me with bringing me to different jails, and then they would show me facilities like I was a human rights lawyer from the outside, but I still was a prisoner. They would bring me different food from what they bring to other prisoners, and of course it's all a sign of a terrible corruption, and preferential treatment is never the answer. But just on a personal level, I learned that my life became so much better after I started to protest vocally. Should we watch? Let's watch the video. It's a video that we've done right after we got out of jail. My first words after I got out of penal colony was Russia without Putin, Россия без Путина. And in a month after that, we went to Sochi Olympics, where Olympic Games, one of the most corrupted Olympic Games in the history of Olympic Games, were held, because Russian government is known for stealing money whenever it's possible, and they stole millions. We went to Sochi to protest it.
Блокирован Олимп под надзором спецсредства, оружие, топы ментов, ФСБ аргумент, МВД аргумент, по России один аплодисменты. Путин научит тебя любить Родину. 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 Внезапный привет миссии в качестве залпа Авроры. Прокурор настроен по-хамски, ему нужен отпор, а не красивые глазки. Проект для протеста, водка, матрешка, тюрьма для болотной, наливка и корка. В ведре конституция, на зоне витишка, стабильность, пайка, забор, вышка. Путин научит тебя любить Родину. 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 Для дождя перекрыт эфир. Гей-прайд отравлен сортир. Двухочковый туалет, приоритет. Приговор России, режим общий, 6 лет. Путин научит тебя любить Родину. 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 Родину, 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 Родину.
We were beaten, arrested at least 10 times while we were doing this performance art piece, but we kept going. We started Media Zona, which became one of the most influential media outlets in Russia today. After the beginning of the war, we had to move most of our journalists from Russia because it just became, they received death threats and could be sent to jail for years just for calling the war. What are we doing today? When the war in the Ukraine started, we did something that I'm really proud of. We created Ukraine DAO, and I came up with this idea of selling Ukrainian flag as a digital art piece, an NFT, and we raised around $7 million just in a few days in the very beginning of the war. And I think you always, and what I remind myself at least, that you always work with whatever tools are at your, whatever you call it in English, and then you try to do your best. We created this crypto network of people who care about a beautiful future and want to bring it closer, and that's what you've done. And what's important, crypto allowed us to collect money from all over the world, because if you use traditional banking system, then it's quite difficult to send money for Ukraine if you're physically in Russia. Your bank account is just going to be frozen, and you face the consequences, all sorts of, including criminal case. When the Supreme Court decided that women don't have to have rights to do whatever they want to do with their bodies, we also reacted through digital art sales, and we were able to raise $500,000. And one of the reasons why I'm in New York today, well, nobody knows where I live regularly, and if I live somewhere, because I'm geographically anonymous. But I came to New York to open Sotheby's auction. We raise money for Planned Parenthood because we believe that my body, my choice, and my pussy, my right. The title work of the Sotheby's sale is Michelle Pred's work, My Body, My Business, and Michelle is here in the audience with us today. And I wanted to finish my lecture with another short video. It's our initial reaction on the leak of the documents that showed that Supreme Court is preparing to overturn Roe Wade. We did an action in Texas State Capitol. They believe that every person with a womb has a fucking right to decide what they want to do with their own body.
Bodily sovereignty for all.
My body, my choice.
Respect our bodies or expect us.
Body autonomy is one of the pillars of the modern civilization. Today, it's been taken away from us, and we're here to protest it.
Texas is the battleground state. Whatever happens here, whatever we allow to pass in our state sets the trend for whatever else in America is going to happen. Florida will follow, Oklahoma will follow, Ohio will follow.
The white cis males of Texas have long brought violence upon Black, indigenous bodies in the name of colonialism.
Matriarchy brings freedom. We believe that people should treat their gender roles not as their shackles, but as paints and brushes. My body does not need advice from a priest. Vasectomy prevents abortions.
And now I want you to welcome Masha Gessen, who is an amazing person, amazing journalist. While I was in jail, while all of us, me, Kat, and Masha were in jail, she wrote an incredible book about Pussy Riot. Thank you so much, Masha, for that, and for being an incredible voice for beautiful Russia of the future.
Thank you. That was thank you. Thank you for that great talk. So this is very strange.
Thank you for being here, seriously.
This is only, I think, the 4th time that we have talked in person.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot, but I feel like we know each other for years.
I'm sorry?
I feel like we do know each other for years because
Yes.
because of your investigation and the book, and we were chatting through prison letters.
So yeah, the beginning of our relationship happened in a series of censored emails with some coded language, including my name. and then we had an incredible interview for about 4 hours in the prison when you were at your lowest point. And so it's wonderful to see you here speaking. Alive and creative. So the first question I want to ask you actually goes back in part to that conversation we had when you were in prison. Because you've had several changes of context and audience that really had the potential to, and I think it at some point did, right, kick the ground out from under you, like making you feel like you didn't know who you were talking to, and you didn't know how to create art that people would understand or that would reach people. And you know, the zigzags were pretty amazing, from the philosophy department of Moscow State University to prison, and then to the United States. And everywhere you have made art. So can you talk about how that works, how you've experienced those changes of context?
Well, I cannot confirm or deny about the United States because I'm geographically anonymous. So it's a new concept that I'm trying to actually make people realize. It's like, you know, you say I identify as, and people usually respect that. And I want them to start respecting I identify as geographically anonymous, because we lost our anonymity against our will in the court. And I remember when I was arrested, this was one of the biggest grievances of mine. Not even the fact that I was arrested, but the fact that we lost anonymity, because it's impossible to keep your balaclavas on while you're in court. But I want to keep some sort of anonymity because my heroes, nobody knows where they are really, like Banksy, who the fuck knows. But I do work a lot in the United States, so that's absolutely true. And I guess the funniest moment was when I decided to create pop music, and I called it Agit Pop, because when we got out of jail, everyone expected us to continue with punk rock music, which we didn't really love. I hate guitars. I don't love punk. I never listened to it. So we would always work with someone else who would create us this punk beats, I would even say, and it would scream on top of it. So when I got out, it was a really difficult place for me to be, because as an artist, I didn't want to be identified as a musician, and especially as a punk musician. So I think something in me that there is a troll inside of me that always wants to break the existing expectations, and I think I learned a lot from my art gurus, one of whom is in the audience right now. Komar and Melamed, they taught me how to never create art that is expectable, how to always change your style. Thank you so much for it. And so I decided to create pop, and that was not taking nicely. It's still, the people still hate me for that. They think I sold out or something like that. I mean, if they saw my statements from Spotify, they would realize that it's really far from the truth, and I'm mostly spending money on my pop videos. But yeah, I'm making them mostly just because I want to break the expectations. It works sometimes. I think when we created Make America Great Again, it was one of the, I think, good works that we created completely outside of the Russian context.
Can you talk about it for a second?
It was a video, it was a song, like really light pop song. And the video goes like, there are cops who are constantly ironing me, or can you describe the video? Do you know the video?
It's been a while. I think you should describe the video.
What is the name of this? Клеймо? Ironing?
Oh, branding, yeah.
Brand. They brand me with different names, like immigrant and fat pig, because they, in the video, they measured my body and they realized that it doesn't fit into Trump's standards of women's beauty. Then they check me on the gynecological chair, and they realized that I made an abortion, and they put a stamp on me. She made an abortion, and they end up just shooting me in the back, and I die. So we created this one at 6 months before Trump got elected, and I felt like my role was to tell my and Pussy Riot's American audience that it's actually really likely that Trump can be elected, and it's not a joke. And what we've done, we took literally this branding. I wanted to show that words can kill, and that's why they were branded on my body and eventually killed me.
So yeah, making that video about 6 months before Trump got elected clearly shows that somehow you do absorb the political context. And of course, coming from a place where so many horrible things are possible, helps us see what's possible here. But you know, when I was writing a book about Pussy Riot, the question I really wanted to try to answer for myself was, where do people like you come from?
Vagina.
Right. But also, in addition to that, you were 22 or 23 years old, and I thought, well, how does this happen? And so I've paid very close attention, both in our earlier conversations and today, to when you talk about your influences. And part of the reason I pay close attention is because I teach, and so when you hear somebody mention somebody who changed the course of their lives, it's very important for a teacher. And in fact, when you were talking about Irina Zherebkina, I took out my phone and texted her. I'm sitting here listening to Nadya Tolokonnikova talk about how important your work has been. Because I want to talk about this for a second. I was actually with her a couple of weeks ago in Kharkiv, and she's having to leave Kharkiv because she lost her job, because the oldest gender studies center in the post-Soviet space is an entirely unnecessary thing in times of war. And so she's moving to a position at the London School of Economics. And this is the person who sort of brought gender studies and feminist philosophy to the Russian-speaking universe. But sort of keeping that in mind, and I'm going to transmit it to her, and also knowing that Vitaly Kamara is here, and remembering things you told me about Prigov and you mentioned Navalny. Can you talk about people who've inspired you and changed your life?
Because of Irina Жеребкina and their translations, I started to dig deeper into what is available in general, and I'm kind of dumb when it comes to languages, so I only could master somehow English. So I started to read Judith Butler in original, and I even started to translate some pieces for for other people at the Department of Philosophy where I was studying. One of the biggest changes, explosive changes in my life happened when I encountered Vladimir Sorokin's Norm. And I think I was around 13 years old, and my dad told me that it's time to stop reading women's magazines. I loved Cosmopolitan, Glamour, because I was mesmerized by the culture of consumption. I was like, I never bought any of those creams that they advertised, but I really loved to learn about storytelling and the way how they sell products. And then my dad told me it's shameful at your age, you're too mature already to read this, so you should switch to something else. And my dad is a big figure in my life. He always curated really nicely what I listen, watch, read, and even though we didn't live together with him, I would still go to visit him during holidays, vacation, and he bought, among other books, he bought Vladimir Sorokin's Norma, and it changed my perception of art forever, because I realized, so I was interested in art, but I loved mostly Russian, or I don't know, how do you call Russian avant-garde movement these days? Because it's not really Russian, is it? They were also from Vitebsk,
I think you call it the Soviet avant-garde, actually.
But it wasn't Soviet yet. It was the beginning of the 20th century.
Right.
So I didn't really
Russian
know.
Empire, yeah.
We all have to unlearn how to be imperialists, and all of these terms have to be changed. And there is no, as far as I know, better term for that. But you know what I mean. All this Tatlin, Malevich, and I loved that they wanted to build a new world, and well, maybe the Soviet state failed them, and so they didn't build a new world, but I loved the intention, and I always loved art that wanted to be more than art. And I didn't, or at least art that served some sort of purpose, art that was truly subversive. And I didn't find any of that at the times when I was growing up, except Soc art and Russian Moscow conceptualism and early 90s radical actionists like Oleg Kulik and Smolovsky. But really, Sorokin was the one who opened this door for me, because I couldn't connect this radical explosiveness of avant-garde movement with bullshit that was happening around me. So then I realized that, there is still art that tells me something meaningful to me. And it's a book where people eat shit. It's one of the chapters in this book. They have to consume a brick of shit every single day. if they throw the shit in the trash, they're being, they may face an arrest for that. And to me, it was a good and a very accurate description of the dull adult world that was I was about to step in. And I was told in the school to read Pushkin, and well, what they do in school, they teach you how to hate art and literature, because they make you to learn by heart these poems that you don't really know what they mean, what is the historical context. So I hated all of that. I hated Pushkin, Turgenev. I couldn't understand any of that and connect in any fashion. So what I think they do in school, they make you fuck dead bodies of the classics. And this is what the whole Sorokin text was about this dead attitude to art. And to me, he showed me how art actually can change people's lives. I also learned a lot about Soviet culture while reading Sorokin, and as a child who was really culturally curious in the 90s, I was trying to understand what was my country before, what are we trying to overcome, what my parents used to see around them, because the country changed so drastically. So basically, Moscow conceptualism became to me a lens through which I learned about my country and where it could go. Dmitry Alexandrovich Prigov is another person, incredibly important. He came to Norilsk, my little city in Siberia, when I was, I think, 13 or 14 years old, and was already, it was like difficult teenage years. I hated my mom. I think she hated me because I was growing up just like my dad. I loved books, she hated books, and she wanted to change me. I think she wanted to lobotomize me, and it was a really difficult time for me. And then Dmitry Alexandrovich Prigov comes to town, and he looks like an adult. He looks like an adult, but he doesn't act like an adult. And he reads Pushkin. He made a little performance. He read Pushkin in different manners. He read it in a manner of Russian Orthodox prayer, a few others. He deconstructed Pushkin, and he showed how you can bring old text into new context and make it alive again. And I was ecstatic. I was jumping on walls and rolling in the snow, crying and screaming, and people thought I totally lost my mind. But I realized that my new goal of life is to come to Moscow and work at Dmitry Alexandrovich Prigov's studio. I didn't know he has a studio, but I was ready to wash, to clean the floors in his studio just to be around this. And this inspired me to come to Moscow when I was 16. I moved to Moscow on my own without my parents and started to live my own life when I was 16. And eventually I met Dmitry Alexandrovich Prigov. And he told me something really important, and he will help me to translate it. He told me, I asked him for advice. He wasn't up for long conversations or for having me work at his studio or anything, but I asked him for advice that really defined my life. He told me, «Живите, не полжи».
Well, he was actually quoting Solzhenitsyn, right? Oddly. But live in truth, don't live within the lie. Right? Okay, thank you. So you, actually, let me ask you this question. You ridicule Putin so consistently and so effectively. But I wonder how you feel about it. And the reason I ask is because I have mixed feelings about ridiculing Putin. And I've had mixed feelings about it for a number of years, since I was on a panel with the Turkish writer Nadya Tolokonnikova, and she suddenly just kind of tensed up and said, "It's not funny." And I think what she meant is that, it can seem very effective to ridicule these tyrants, because it is as though we reduce their power by ridiculing them. But it also creates a fiction in which they're not perhaps jailing, as Turkey is, tens of thousands of people, or shelling and bombing and destroying the lives of millions of people. So how do you think about that? How do you think about the role of ridicule?
I haven't been ridiculing Putin in a light manner, I think, since Putin has pissed himself. I think so. I totally get what you say. I hate it as well. I mean, especially when they portray Putin as a gay person. This is just stupid and deeply offensive, and it's not funny at all. I don't treat that person lightly. I think he's an absolute evil. So I really don't think I ridicule. In 2011, when we said Putin has pissed himself, it was a different atmosphere. And you remember it. We were surrounded by this atmosphere of celebration, because we really had a lot of hope, and we really thought that we can change our country. And Putin really seemed like this small, stupid dictator who we can easily overthrow. So that's why at the time, in this atmosphere of carnival, where people were walking around Moscow and other cities of Russia with balloons and funny slogans, humor was a big part of our movement. Not just Pussy Riot, but our movement that we share. Белоленточное движение, white ribbon movement. And then Putin was trying to mock us, and he said, because we wear these white ribbons as a symbol of protest, he called our ribbons condoms, and he thought it's funny. So these days, it was incredibly difficult for me to even create this portrait of Putin, burn him, and create Putin's ashes. It was deeply emotional for me. I was crying, all of that stuff, because thinking of that person, it's not easy. But I think you also can see the change of the tone. It's much more dark and meditative. There is no carnival, there is no circus atmosphere anymore, because we are talking about big tragedy here.
Thank you for continuing to do it. Thank you.
Thank you.